Hello, everyone. Dr. Stillman here, and today we have a special episode of Monday Masterclass. We're going to be talking about hidden toxins in first responders, veterans, blue-collar workers, and more. This is in honor of September 11th. I actually will mention too that I dedicated my book to first responders and veterans and active duty military. And so I wanted to give them some content to help them understand some of the unique things that they face in their work environment. For those of you who are not in any of these professions or situations, I want you to understand that this content is actually very relevant for you because you have these same exposures at a lesser intensity, but over long time scales, they're all relevant to you as well. I cover all this stuff with patients in my practice. You'll just see, as we're going to talk about in the papers we're going to cover today, that it is particularly common and important for people who are in these professions. So without further ado, let's jump into the papers. Okay. So the first paper is Persistent Organic Pollutants in 9/11 World Trade Center Rescue Workers Reduction Following Detoxification. This is a fascinating paper where basically what they did is they looked at these pollutants, organic pollutants, which, when someone says organic pollutants, they're talking about carbon-based pollutants, things that are made usually from petroleum toxins. Technically, this would include things like mold toxins, which many of you here in the health and wellness world are very concerned about. They're handled in the body very much the same way, so you can think about them similarly in terms of how the body's going to deal with them. So these organic pollutants were extremely elevated in 9/11 World Trade Center rescue workers. And these are organic pollutants that all of you out there in our modern world are exposed to pretty much constantly. And there's a lot that you can do to minimize your risk. I talk about that with my patients and with people in my coaching programs, which we're going to cover how you can join those later. But the reason that people who cleaned up the World Trade Center site were so intoxicated by these things is that there were a lot of different things that a lot of conditions that sort of came together to create this perfect storm. So number one, there was an ultrafine particulate dust cloud. Now, fine particles are very hard for your body to filter out through your nose. This is one of the reasons why nasal breathing is really important. It's your filtration system. It limits the amount of particulate matter that can get down into the lungs. So these ultrafine particles, they'll carry in with them, or they will contain lots and lots of toxic things, heavy metals, organic pollutants, you name it. And the more of that gets down into the lung, the more the body has to get rid of it. And when something is inhaled into the lung, you have to understand that the surfactant in the lung, which coats the lungs, alveoli and bronchioles, is going to dissolve it. And it's going to get into the blood. Where does it go from the blood? It's in the pulmonary vascular bed. It's going to get pulled into the blood itself. It's going to get pulled into the heart, and then the heart's going to pump it all over the body. It's supposed to be detoxified in the liver. It's going to be filtered by the kidneys, but the more toxins you put into the system, the more you're putting pressure on the system to detoxify those things. Remember, it takes nutrients in order to detoxify these things. That's why I'm so serious about helping people understand nutrition. High temperature combustion. This is a really interesting element. So high temperatures will change chemicals. It will make inert chemicals highly volatile and reactive. It will create new, exciting, and not so fun chemicals that your body then has to deal with. So what happens when you have a high temperature situation in a high rise where you've got concrete, which can be loaded with heavy metals, you've got lots of different building materials that could have plastics and organic pollutants, all kinds of things. And then you basically fuse them all together in a very high temperature situation. It's a disaster. It's a recipe for lots of toxin exposure, right? Now, on top of that, you have this violent collapse of the buildings, which then basically throws all this stuff up. That's the fine dust particulate. These levels were very elevated for months after the event. And you also had months-long fires going on. That's continuing to create these new conformers, new chemicals that are coming out. And that's why people who rescued people from this catastrophe got so sick. So, rescue workers developed symptoms that remained unresolved with time. This was a very significant issue, very well reported on. I'm not going to go into all those details because they're so well covered by the mainstream news. You know, I mean, and they didn't actually lie about that for once. This study characterizes body burdens of polychlorinated biphenyls, polychlorinated dibenzofurans, and polychlorinated dioxins in rescue workers. Now, these are three very important classes of organic pollutants. And I want you to understand, they didn't go out and test these people for every kind of pollutant under the sun. All right. This is three very specific groups. We're going to talk more about heavy metals later, which is the other thing that I'm really concerned about in my patients. So, what did they find? Well, the number one things this jumped out at me. So, persistent coughs, headaches, memory disturbances, and other symptoms is what the rescue workers complained of. I see these all the time in my patients in my practice, and I treat them with basically the same things that they talk about in this paper and that I'm going to talk about in the next paper to get them well. And so people who have headaches, they don't think they're related to some kind of environmental toxicity or exposure. Their headaches will respond to these natural holistic therapeutics that we would use in order to deal with something like an acute intoxication like we're dealing with here. Because what really people today have is chronic low grade toxicity from their environment. Okay, this is remarkable. Look at this. Dioxins slowly return to normal background levels after 3 months. It took 3 months for environmental levels of dioxins to go back to normal. Now, dioxins are really bad, well associated with cancer, very bad. We should, if we don't, we should have some rules about how much people are exposed to, but they're exposed to a lot. Okay, they measured levels of these different toxins. They converted them into what we call toxin equivalents. This is basically like saying, okay, they're not all the same, right? But if we're going to lump them all together as fruits, right? We're comparing apples to oranges, but they're both fruits. So we're going to call them, fruit equivalents. That's the same thing as toxin equivalents. Okay. So here are the main things that people, the rescue workers complained of: respiratory impairment, mental, emotional distress. We're going to talk more about this in the next paper. Decreased sensory systems, chronic muscle and joint pain, GI disorders, and skin rashes. Again, stuff I see every single day in my practice. Now let's look at what they saw in these people's levels. So these are changes. Well, we're going to start with figure 1, actually. So changes in blood total, WHO total toxic equivalents, mono-ortho PCB levels with detox. So these are the pre-detox numbers in the gray, post-detox in the black. This detoxification protocol had a significant impact on these people's total toxic burdens. This is a small sample size, yes, but it's very consistent. You'll see that just as they report in this paper, people feel better too when you get their total toxic burden down. Figure 2, changes in total WHO TEQ non-ortho PCB levels with detox. Again, different toxin categories, same effects. You have one outlier here who for some reason did not respond. I will tell you the non-responders, sometimes their toxin levels go up because you're actually mobilizing these toxins. Very interesting to see that happen. And again, here, change in these PCB levels with treatment compared with 1 month of no treatment. So notice here, what they're comparing is what happened when we did nothing versus what happened when we treated them. And you'll see that many of these people had increases with no treatment. Look at that. Some of them had mild decreases, but by far and away, the most consistent decreases were after treatment. So running around with a big total toxic load and not having a game plan to get rid of it is a recipe for getting the same results you're already getting. You have to change something about your diet, your lifestyle, how you're eating, how you're thinking, how you're behaving, how you're living your life, right? Stuff that we cover with people in our coaching programs. Okay. This is the one that really is amazing to me though. Self-reported symptom severity before and after detoxification. Look at how substantially these people reduced their symptom burden. The before is the gray, the after is the dark gray or black. Substantial improvements in virtually every single metric. And that's what really makes natural integrative holistic medicine, whatever you want to call it, so refreshing, so rewarding, so empowering. Is this. You see this happen over and over and over again. Dr. Stillman, I feel so much better. I love those words and I hear them all the time because this is what we do. Okay, let's go a little bit more into the actual, where is it? Their treatment protocol. They didn't actually include that much detail on this in the paper. Detoxification treatment regimen developed by Hubbard, which included exercise, sauna bathing, and vitamin and mineral supplements. Okay. I didn't get into this paper by Hubbard. This was a 1982, 1990 paper. I use similar protocols. I will go back and do Hubbard stuff another day because now I'm very interested. But basically, all these things, we coach people into how to do them. There's things also not mentioned here that I recommend to people and that we work with them to incorporate that I think are really powerful and impactful that most integrative and functional medicine doctors are either not talking about or not using or both. All right, second paper that I really want to cover with you guys today. This one was fascinating. Camus Kokai is an MD in New York. I actually know him indirectly. He took care of my mother for a period of time when she was living in New York City. So he came up with this great intervention where he basically found a bunch of firefighters. It wasn't a ton, but it was enough. Firefighters and rescue personnel who had serious issues, 8 or more serious health complaints, severe respiratory problems, digestive problems, skin rashes, sleeplessness, anxiety, depression, weight gain, elevated blood pressure, lethargy, and recurrent headaches. Again, I see these complaints every single day in my practice. Heavy metal toxicity was suspected as a causal factor for many of these symptoms. Different toxin category here, okay? So why am I so interested in heavy metals? Because when we treat people for heavy metal toxicity, we see really big improvements in their overall health and well-being. Why do people in the conventional medical community look at me funny when I talk about this? Because they don't understand heavy metal dynamics within the human body. I will tell you, having tested hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hair and blood levels, that if you rely on blood levels, which is what most doctors are trained to think about, you will miss a huge proportion of people who have a high total toxic load of these heavy metals. We're going to cover the importance of hair testing and the power of hair testing later in a similar study that is one of my favorites from the cardiovascular disease literature. Okay, so the problem with heavy metals is that people don't have a grasp of how they move within the body. So if you take in a tuna today, you're going to have this big spike in, and let's say it's a big, nice tuna steak, as I occasionally like to indulge in myself. You're going to get this big, nice spike in mercury in your blood, and then your body is going to sequester that mercury into your cells and tissues. Okay. Where does it tend to go? Places like the liver, places like the brain. It tends to drive people crazy and really harm their overall health over time. Because while no, people are not, dying from heavy metal toxicity acutely, as heavy metals accumulate within the body, they create a chronic stress, oxidative stress. They chronically compete with nutritive minerals, manganese, molybdenum, chromium, selenium, copper, zinc, and this ruins your body's normal healthy mineral dynamics. That's why if you look at the toxic doses of heavy metals, you'll find that it takes less mercury to kill someone than almost any other toxic substance on earth. It's more toxic than a lot of the pesticides, herbicides, and organic compounds that you hear people talking about in the integrative wellness space. And this is why I'm so focused right now in my practice on hair tissue mineral analysis. I see it having such a positive effect on people, helping them improve their mineral status and improve this element of their health. So the problem is that these become sequestered in the body. You'll miss them on the blood, and it takes lots of time, and it takes a diligence, and it takes care in order to get them to come out by empowering the body to detoxify them. Okay, this is not, in my opinion, something that is best left to chance or random protocols kind of thrown together. Yes, you can get a lot of mileage with just basic fundamental stuff that I'm going to talk about later. But I really think that a tailored approach is ideal. And that's why I have coaching programs and why we have a medical practice where I help people understand exactly what they should be eating and what supplements they should be taking for optimal health and well-being. Okay, so what did they do in this study? They assessed for heavy metal toxicity. They found that they used a urine test. 85% had excessively high levels of lead and mercury. Now, they did provoke these men using, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then they treated them with chelation therapy. So when you provoke somebody, you're basically saying, okay, what's this person's total body burden? And then you're eliciting it, and then you're testing them. This tells you if they have an elevated total body burden, regardless of when they accumulated it. Okay. Then they use chelation therapy using DMSA. This is an FDA approved sulfur compound. It's very effective at chelating heavy metals. It's not my first choice. I'll explain why later. They did 3 to 4 months of treatment. The first cohort of 100 individuals reported significant, greater than 60% improvement in all symptoms. Okay, what else did they do? What else is important here? This is a really interesting little paragraph. I talked earlier about why the toxic soup at ground zero was so toxic, but look at some of these numbers. 200,000 to 400,000 pounds of lead from electronics. Wow. Vaporized mercury from over 500,000 fluorescent light bulbs. Wow. Dioxins created when plastics combusted with copper. Copper's in a lot of our electrical wiring, right? 130,000 gallons of oil and insulating fluid from transformers. And 400 to 1,000 tons of asbestos, plus 10,000 gallons of jet fuel. That is a toxic soup. One of the earliest reports of toxicity came out from the Associated Press, revealed that all had high levels of mercury in their blood. I think that's their blood. Could be their urine. Doesn't matter. Okay. There's also a really interesting problem here, sort of chicken or the egg, that I want you guys to understand. A lot of people today are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? The problem that you're going to find in clinical practice is that people who have high levels of toxins don't feel well. Their brains don't function well. So as soon as you reduce their total toxic burden, they're able to actually cope with a lot of their psychological issues better. Now, that might be anecdotal, right? But it's being alluded to here in this real published paper, right? In the literature that was done in the real world. And I got to tell you, anecdotally, when you get people in a better balance as far as their minerals, their vitamins, etc., they do a lot better. And that's part of why we do both at my practice. Okay. Within 2 to 3 months of beginning the course of treatment, etc., over 60% reported significant improvement in all major health complaints presented at the outset. That's a great result. As they began to improve and feel stronger, psychological issues began to emerge. Another pattern we see in my practice. Okay. What did they do in this protocol? So this is a very vague protocol. They do not include particular, in this portion anyway, very specific numbers. You'll also notice, you may not realize this, but I do, things like, let's see, where is it? Intravenously, right? So they talk about using IV vitamin C and acetylcysteine and glutathione and things like that. The problem with this, as I see it, just from having read the paper and not having talked to the authors, right? Not all these people did the same thing. And that makes it hard to standardize and protocolize and then roll out to the general public, which is why it's worthwhile to have a clinician in your corner who's helping you understand how to put together all these different things. I know how to do this in an affordable way, whereas a lot of people going out there trying to figure out, well, how do I boost or balance my neurotransmitter levels, or how do I get an infrared sauna, or how do I use glandulars or acupuncture or homeopathy or whatever. I mean, they will get deluged with these different treatment options, and they won't actually know how to put them all together to get the best outcome for a cost that they can actually afford for a long period of time. It really pains me to see people putting a lot of money into their wellness and not getting the results that they want. I see that all the time. And, because this video is specifically focused on helping first responders, veterans, these are not guys who are making a ton of money. I've seen them spend a lot of their money on their wives, their girlfriends, their children, even when they probably needed treatment more than they did. And I really wish that they had better options that were more affordable, particularly right now with how things are out there in, our dearly beloved economy. So anyway, I think that's enough about this paper. Very important to understand these toxic metal dynamics, which we're going to talk a little bit more about soon. So one of the best things that I think people can do for their overall health and well-being, and this is, of course, not the world according to Dr. Stillman alone, I don't think there's anyone out there who debates or disputes the benefits of sauna bathing. I mean, I find me one person with a serious background in health and wellness, I would be shocked. There, and although I have to admit that many of my colleagues are grossly uninformed about this topic, they will say stupid things like, "Well, I'm sure it's good, but I don't, so it probably doesn't matter that much." Okay, that's not true. It's not true at all. This is one of my favorite studies on sauna bathing and health and fitness in general. So this is on Finnish men. This is called the QOPO heart study, ischemic heart study. Great study, lots of data, very well collected. What they found when they analyzed this, they analyzed what your risks were if you had a high or low frequency Hello, everyone. Dr. Stoneman back. Unfortunately, the live stream cut out. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and re-record the whole thing another day rather than kind of try to cut these things back together. So stay tuned for that. I will be talking about the iron theory of heart disease. I will be talking about problems with mercury in hair and fish oil during that. And stay tuned. And for those of you who are my premium Substack subscribers, you will be getting a link to the Monday Q&A shortly.